Dr. Akiva Gunlow-Belk, Dean of Jewish Studies at Benino Auditorium Institute, LLC. Welcome to our discussion on Passover. Dear ones, I would ask you to not prejudge this discussion. It would be easy to do so because the title says Passover, the last 6 days of Rabbi Jesus' life on the earth. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me and not to prejudge what we're going to be discussing. Dear ones, this is our guide, our textbook. I encourage you to pick a copy up. The information contained in this is so incredibly valuable. Now, those that are not raised as B'nai Yisrael, individuals who are Jewish and who have been taught the observances of Judaism will find this book to be very interesting and helpful. And Christians will also find this book to be very interesting and helpful. Now, we must understand that we need to have tenderness, and we have to try to employ our compassion, and even though we might not see eye to eye on some of the revelation that God has given us, this book here will certainly provide a lot of valuable information and revelation. So I encourage you to please pick a copy up. Dear ones, many, many years ago, several decades ago, I was a former Messianic congregational leader, and I was preparing a discussion about Rabbi Jesus' last days on earth. Now, those who are offended by me using the term Rabbi Jesus, let's understand one thing right up front. When Christians write in their book, in their beliefs, that Jesus was a rabbi, and so we don't want to be disrespectful. We have information that Jesus did go to yeshiva and that he did learn under known rabbis of the time. So I don't think we should quarrel about that. It has nothing to do with whether or not we agree with Jesus' teachings as a rabbi. It has to do with showing proper respect. Now, dear ones, many years ago, I was preparing this discussion. And the discussion was going to actually be entitled the last 6 days of Jesus' life on earth, Rabbi Jesus' life on earth. And I was going to take the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I was going to set them side by side and just go right through them and show how the Passover came about, and the Passover, the supper, and the Seder, and so on and so forth. And as I began to do this, issues began to surface that I had no answers for. All these years, 40 years of my life, from childhood to the age of 39, and then I entered this period of transition. All these years of my life, I never really questioned anything that I had been taught. Now, my family had left Judaism and had entered into another religion, into Christianity. And so when I was born, I was taught Christianity, and I wasn't taught Judaism. And that's what happens in a lot of countries, especially in America. There's a lot of individuals whose grandparents or great-grandparents were Jewish, but it has been lost along the way. God help us, do none harm. That's sad. And so that was the case with me. I was only Jewish by birth, not by observances. And so, but we were aware of our Jewishness. I mean, we did, practice some of the observances at Pesach and at Hanukkah. So we celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah and Passover and Easter, what we call it Resurrection Sunday. So we celebrated these things. And but when I started doing this study, just in the English. My Hebrew was almost nil. It was almost non-existent. And I started doing these studies. I started finding there were issues. And these issues deeply disturbed me. And I didn't know what to do. And so I talked to some Baptist pastors, and they were like distraught. They were really upset in a sense because I would even ask such questions. And I talked to a few Messianic pastors and congregation leaders. I was seeking advice. I was really worried, really distraught. I couldn't understand how these situations could be there. I had been taught a certain way, and I had believed that way all my life, and now I was finding out it wasn't the way that I had been taught, that it was completely different. So over a period of time, as I made this study, more questions arose and more questions arose. And then one day, while I was on Shabbat in a Messianic congregation, I was sitting there with my talit on and my tzitzit and my prayer book, and it was like the windows of heaven opened in a dark room, in a very dark room. It was like the shade went up, the windows of heaven were opened, and I had this revelation that I needed to observe the Sabbath. So on the way home, the revelation just continued to pour in, and I could just see that my life was going to be changed dramatically. And I was shocked, and I was numb, and I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. So the next day, I called the Seventh-day Adventists, and I said, I want everything that you have on the Sabbath. And so I went down to see him, and I told him I just had a revelation of the Sabbath. And they showed me a variety of books, and they even gave some books and materials to me. And I went home, and I immediately sat down and underlined things as I read through, and I read. So my first observation, my first real heavy revelation was the revelation of Sabbath, that God commanded the people of Israel to honor the Sabbath. And I realized that in our world today, there's many people who are not Jewish who do not honor the Sabbath. The command isn't for them to honor the Sabbath. The command is for the people of Israel. So, after many, many, many years, I sat down and I wanted to share about Passover. There's so many misunderstandings about Passover, and so this book helps work through some of these misunderstandings. I share about my life, my experiences of walking through this period of time, of being so amazed and so distrustful and so angry, so upset, because I had been taught incorrectly, and I learned that I had been taught incorrectly. I have two brothers. They both still firmly believe the way I used to. And they consider me a reprobate. They consider me an outcast. They feel like I'm going to burn in hell. God forbid. You're not going to burn in hell, folks. You don't have to worry. God is very loving, understanding, and tender. So I invite you to be a part of our discussion, a part of our class. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to participate. Feel free to get involved. Thank you for joining me.